Okay. Checking I had to cut off the air filter. It's making a little too much noise. So, we're going to have a fun chat today. We are going to discuss parallel realities and how we create them, how we see them, how we bring them in if we want to do that, and does every choice you really make create something else? Because that is what you see, how you see it explained, right? That every choice we make, we in another timeline we made the opposite choice and we create a branch timeline. So we have all these branches going every which way, and we have to kind of find a way to start to bring them in if we want to. And how do we see them, and do we have access to them, and how much access do we really have? Can we see other people's parallel timelines? It's almost back to that the what's it called? It's that famous poem, Road Not Taken. I think it was Emerson. I can't remember, but I think that's who wrote it. The road, maybe it was Thoreau. Emerson Thoreau. Maybe it's the same person. It's been too long. It's been too long since I've taken literature. That's for sure. Okay, so how do we create a timeline, and what is a timeline? So we'll start there, because we talk a lot about timelines and what are they, and we're in one timeline, we want to shift to a different timeline. How does that work? So some people are really sensitive to timelines, and when I say they're sensitive, they can see the timeline. Even in their human existence, some people are just more connected, right? There are some of us that weren't connected at all, and some of us that were a little more sensitive to things, and we were just a little more connected. We could feel maybe the presence of, I'm going to start here because this is how our human would perceive it, and then we're gonna shift the consciousness of it. But you would be more susceptible to maybe feeling other, like if you were in a haunted house, you could feel that. You could feel other things around you. If you were different, hold on, I see something I have to fix. Sorry, my refrigerator was open, it was going to start beeping. You would just be more sensitive, right? And there was a thing people used to do years and years and years ago. I don't know if people still do it or not, where you could hold something up to you and decide if you wanted it or not. And people do this with a lot of over-the-counter medications. You could do it with a lot of holistic medications. It didn't really matter what it was. It's kind of like a pendulum in a sense. And we've talked a little bit about pendulums and how they can give you some access into the unknown in a sense. And so we're gonna go kind of human here just to start off, and then we're gonna bring it back around. So these are all things we kind of notice. And when you would hold something up to you, if your body wanted it, it would move toward it, which means you lean toward it, and if it didn't, it would back away from it. This is a very crude way of sensing whether you wanted to do it or not. And basically what you're doing though is you were feeling into the timeline as if you took it or not, right? You could feel what was going to happen if you went in that direction, and that's basically what you were doing. You just feel in the timeline. So there are some people that were just a little more sensitive. Now I would say a lot of that stuff opens up to people once they know what they're doing, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I kind of feel like I'm a little more sensitive, or I understand a little bit more now of what's going on. So I feel like I can feel more, see more, because we read something. We maybe had a tarot reading. We did Reiki, something that maybe opened us up to what we were doing. So just some of us are a little more plugged in. It doesn't really matter when you go through awakening and ascension. It just, some people had a little bit shorter leap to make when we started getting into a lot of these realities. It wasn't as hard to believe. We could just kind of feel like we'd already know there was something a little amiss, and because we could feel it. So basically you're sensing the timeline. We would dream different timelines. I would always say in the beginning for me, and then when I got into different kind of teachings, I did a lot of dream work stuff. I took a lot of classes on dreaming. You could dream these timelines. Like if you weren't sure whether to take this job or not take this job, ask the question, go to sleep, and each night ask a different question. If I take the job, I want to see what happens. And whether you saw anything or not, it never mattered. How'd you feel when you woke up? Did you feel shitty? Did you feel like scared? Did you just feel like that felt like a disaster? Did you feel dread? That was way more important than what you saw. The overall feeling of that timeline. Because in that moment, that might be all you could grasp. That was all you could get into, is that overall feeling of the timeline. The rest of it didn't matter. So we were there, right? We were, and then the next night you'd pick the other choice, okay, if I don't take this job, what happens? And let me go see what that timeline feels like. And these were kind of ways to start separating timelines out so we could feel into what they were. Now, at that moment, we don't realize that we're always creating a new timeline. Right? We kind of have this linear view of it because that's all it's the only concept we can make is a linear view of a timeline. That's why it's easy to see other people's timelines, because you get to a point where you always live from the future because you know what's going to happen and you can see where everyone else is in that timeline too. So you kind of can see what's happening with everybody because we always exist from a different time. We exist from a time farther away, because we exist in a different frequency. That's why you have access to more information. You have access to more timelines. You can see more. You can feel more. You can start to pull in these other timelines. But in the beginning, we don't have that access, but we can feel into them. Even whether you're in your awakening process, you're starting your ascension, even like I said, in our human existence, some people are just a little more plugged in. You had mediums that I would say maybe they fluctuate more around the fourth dimensional, as far as dimensional consciousness, because they're still seeing all of it as kind of separate. And when we're in that, we all see it's kind of separate. When I was doing I used to do a lot of haunted house kind of stuff and go and feel into stuff. When we're starting to open up, these are really fun things we do, I remember I went on a haunted house thing in New Orleans, and it was Savannah. I went on one in New Orleans too, but this was Savannah. And you could start to feel and picture different things floating around. And I remember I was talking to the tour guide and I was like, yeah, like there's two things over the tree. There was a couple and they were dressed how they were dressed. And he had actually a picture under that tree on his phone of an old-timey couple that someone else, I guess, had done with infrared or something. That kind of matched the description of what I had seen. Or what I felt. And basically I was seeing everything through my third eye. I have known people who saw these things very physically in front of them. That was not me. It's still not me. I still see everything here. I still see more energetically. I don't see the energy forming in front of me. In that sense, where some people would just see them, that was never really me. But I was still very clairaudience too, so I could hear everything. So a lot of these things start opening up. We start sensing and feeling into these timelines. And we start to see that, like I said, in the beginning, we might just think there's one or two. We don't realize every choice we make creates a different one. And they will eventually converge, but they don't converge in the points we think they're going to converge at, right? Because there are certain things in each timeline that will match up. They don't 100% go these totally separate ways, because the energy of which they were created is normally the same. They're spawned off of the same consciousness, right? No matter if we pick to take the job or not to take the job, right? To go back to our experience earlier, it didn't matter. The consciousness at which we made the choice was the same, because we were in that consciousness when we made the choice, It didn't technically matter which one we chose. They're each going to end in the same place, but we're just going to go through a different experience to get to the same place. That's why they will eventually converge again. A lot of these converge again. If you had a timeline where you were married, and in one timeline you decided to divorce, you never had children, and the other timeline you decided to stay with the person, and you had children, you could eventually get children in this timeline. Might come a different way. They might just be kids in the neighborhood you get really close to, and all of a sudden you're like a pseudo mother to them. It can be nieces or nephews you could adopt. A lot of them will reconverge because there's certain moments in the timeline that you're going to have to experience because they're going to open you up. There's different things in the timelines that are opening up your consciousness, opening up your heart. And whether it's animals, whether it's different relationships, whether it's children. Children are a big one for a lot of people. Pets are a big one for a lot of people because they just open up people who aren't really, if you're really closed down to human interaction, like partners, romantic partners, you'll find you get things a different way. Like you'll get children, maybe in a weird way. And not in the same way that you thought you were going to get them, because they're going to open you up and you wouldn't be open to a romantic partnership. I know that was how mine played out. I would open up to kids, but I was not going to be opening up to romantic partnerships anymore when I was at that space, because I had too many that had gone awry. I wasn't at that time going to go there. So I needed something else to open me up and to bring out a softer side that children tend to bring out in us. Animals do the same thing. So when we start talking about parallel realities, it's not that they're so drastically different. Because remember, the consciousness creates them. The same consciousness creates one parallel reality. It's almost the same one. Now that's when we get deja vu. We start getting into all these are more like human concepts, that how we feel and how we see things. Because we're starting to feel with our energy field, and that feels familiar. I haven't been here, but I feel like I have. We get drawn to certain things, certain places, certain people, because in different timelines, we've met those people. And not just the one in this timeline we're creating. Remember, we're across space and time. So we're creating parallel timelines with all over the place, whether we're in ancient Egypt right now, whether we're in Lemuria, whether we're in Atlantis, whether we are in galactic timelines. We're creating timeline after timeline after timeline. That's how when we talk about clearing timelines in our sleep, and I mentioned at the very end of a video I did a couple days ago. I meant to do it at the beginning, but it came at the end. That's when I finally got around to it. We talk about different timelines and how we can clear them. And we don't have to go through them because we clear the programming. And you'll see a lot of scientific, even in human existence, you'll see a lot of scientific discovery with seeing how frequency messes with certain biological cells, whether it be virus cells, bacterial cells. And our human DNA is technically virus. The programming leads to what a human's going to label as sickness later on down the road because of the distortion in the program. So when you expose a lot of this stuff to high frequencies, things start to break apart. The programming starts to break apart. But it's not just exposing yourself to these high frequencies one time or, for 10 minutes. It's embodying in the frequency. That's what starts to really purge the programming. It's not just listening to it or meditating and then breaking off and go and living your life. It's kind of the same thing. So we can clear a lot of different timelines. And sometimes we see them, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we don't see them because they're so distorted. We get so wrapped up in the timeline, it messes with our human mind so much that, and when I really would mean human mind, our whole human consciousness, and that's really ruled by our root chakra, honestly. That's what kind of rules the human consciousness. That and solar plexus, but a lot of it's root chakra programming and solar plexus. So we get so bogged down in these timelines that we can't almost carry on. They're so disordered, they're so fucked up, they're so messed up. A lot of times we don't see them. Sometimes you will see them. Sometimes you will see one and you're like, wow, I didn't feel afraid or like it was a warning. When I woke up, I felt like I cleared something. I wouldn't have to go through that timeline, because in that timeline I had to go through this physical experience to clear something. In this timeline, I don't have to, because I cleared the program a different way. I did it energetically. I also had to move through some things physically here. Different people came in, but in that timeline I had to go through it a totally different way. But it gets you to the same place. So why a lot of these parallel timelines and galactic timelines, a lot of these things are not rooted in this existence. The ones that are, and even the ones that aren't, the ones that are, we tend to be a little more curious about, and we tend to be a little more like, well, why, how can I pull these in? So if we go under the feeling that We're creating them all through the same level of consciousness, right? Whether we take the job, don't take the job, get married, don't get married, move to New York, don't move to New York, whatever it is. It doesn't, like I said, those things don't really matter. If the consciousness creates it, and then we're going to move through the timeline, and as we move through that timeline, and you're over here moving through this timeline, your frequency is going to change. Now, how fast it changes in this timeline, is this timeline going to get you somewhere quicker? Is this timeline, because the more conscious our choice is, the quicker we get to where we want to go, right? Because we realize it's not a linear path, whereas our human existence points us in a very linear way. In one timeline, you might go through ascension earlier. In the next timeline, you won't. You're still going to go through ascension, but maybe it's sped up over here, and it's not sped up over here. How do you communicate with yourself in different timelines and say, okay, what's going on over there? And do I want to pull some of that in? And maybe not pull in the exact experience, but can I start pulling in some of the aspects over there that you've embodied? Can I pull in some of that power, that inner power that's been embodied over there, without having to go through the experience in this timeline? Can I pull it over? How do I get over there? How do I get to that frequency? Because it's all the frequency, right? We can't, and then the question comes, why can't we see these other timelines? And I don't mean like see them energetically. Why can't I see them? If I did this one way, how come there's not another me walking around doing something totally different? Well, technically there is. But because it's in a different frequency, you can't see it. It's just like having a dream about something you want to experience, and then it's not here. It's not here because your body is not at the frequency of that dream. When your body gets to the frequency of where that reality exists, where that timeline is, then you experience the timeline. That's why when you wake up, you forget a lot of stuff we see in our sleep state, because the frequency of our body is so much lower than the frequency we can achieve when we're sleeping. It's always going to be. Now, we can get super high frequencies when we're awake, but we're still going to be we're still going to be higher when we're sleeping, because we're not confounded by the body. We're not confounded by the frequency of the body, which is always going to be lower than the consciousness you can hit, because the body has to go through so much purifying to get to a higher frequency. And it gets there, but we work on that for years and years and years and years to clear that programming, to get out of these realities that don't serve us. And then we look at the timelines where, what if I stayed in that reality that didn't serve me? And then how come I can't see that one? Well, it's the same thing. That reality is that, I'm going to use higher, lower here just to explain it. It's such a lower frequency than where we're at, we don't even see any of that. And the same thing with the higher ones. I can't even see any of that around me because it's oscillating at a different frequency. Now, what you're going to find is, as you go through your ascension, you're going to start to tap into these. You're going to start to feel them and see them, and see that, oh, okay, I can feel I got to go here, right? I need to go to the store. For whatever reason, I need to go to the store. And there'll be someone at the store you need to see. And whether you know the people or not, never matters. You have to go. I used to always know when I had to go somewhere. Always know when I have a contract with someone. Because the contracts in these timelines, even though depending on the timeline you decide to take, which road you travel, in this present consciousness, which road you travel, you're going to activate different soul contracts, right? If you take this job here, you're going to activate all these soul contracts over here that you would have missed if you'd gone this way. And then this way you have all these other soul contracts you're going to go through. Because we have kind of a lot of redundancy built into these timelines, because technically you're actually working through all of them, but consciously you don't remember until you get to a certain space where, even though you might not even remember it all the time, when you meet the person, yeah, this is where I was here. I was supposed to meet this person, whether it be for 2 hours or 10 minutes. I was supposed to sit here. Person's going to show up. I'm going to sit and talk to this person, and then I'm going to bounce. I have that happen all the time. I always knew when I had to be somewhere. I always knew when I had a contract to fulfill. I would go. I would sit. I would wait. I would wait, and I would always get to this point. If I waited longer than like an hour and no one was there, I would be like, okay, come on, universe, TikTok, I want to go home, I'm tired. So this person needs to show up. Usually within 5 minutes, whoever it was would show up. Because it was like, okay, come on, let's cut through the crap, let's get going. Whatever this contract is, let's get it done. And a lot of that is bleeding over timelines, because in a different reality, you met this person in a different way. But a lot of them do converge because the frequencies will once again converge again. And there's certain things we're going to experience. Now, when we start to talk about, and even if it's a feeling, right? It's a feeling in one timeline. Like if you can see one timeline where you can feel into it and go, I feel like I would have been happier in that timeline if I'd stayed with that person or if I'd left that person. And like I said, none of that, it doesn't matter what the choice was. The consciousness of the choice is what matters. And if we felt like in that moment, maybe I didn't follow the highest timeline, right? So we're always in this quest for the highest timeline we can get to, right? Even if we don't know what it is in that moment. I don't know what the highest timeline is. I just want to get there. I want to be able to feel into that highest timeline. I want to be able to see where the highest timeline is. I want to be able to get there. I want to be able to experience that. I want to know what that is. A lot of times we can get very almost obsessed with that, obsessed with the road we didn't take and want to know what happened. And then, we see, we'll kind of back in, people still do this, but not to the extent I think people used to do it years ago, because now it's so easy. Everyone puts everything online. But, you start trying to figure out what happened to this person in this timeline. Where did they go? What's going on with them? Maybe we can reconnect in this timeline. Maybe in this timeline we stay together. Asking to bring in a different timeline, we have to look at the consciousness we're doing that from. Is it because we don't like our current timeline, because we're working through a lot of programming and, oh God, I just want to jump to another one? That's a very human consciousness thing to do. We want to kind of hit the eject button. We want to get to the escape hatch. We built an escape hatch into every reality. I guarantee you have one in every reality you built. You always have an escape hatch you can go right through. You might not like the fall down, but you can get out of it. We feel like we clawing, or it was the movie in Shawshank Redemption when he built the tunnel. It took him like 15, 20 years to build this tunnel, but he finally got out. You always have an escape hatch. And sometimes we go a little too quickly out of it, and we don't really finish the timeline because we just don't want to deal with the timeline. So we just try to escape it. And then we just end up basically back in another timeline very similar, because we cleared a little bit of programming, but we didn't get to it all because we didn't sit there in the uncomfortableness of what we were trying to accomplish and have the open discussions that had to be had and really look at the timeline. We just exited out of it. I call them trapdoors because I had a friend who used to say that. Escape pod, ladder out the window. There's always a way out of it. And as humans, we took that way out. Now I know I can't leave a timeline when I am not at complete peace with the timeline. If I'm bitching about something, if I'm pissed off. There are times when you leave timelines like that. But you get to but normally when we do that, because we're letting emotions rule us, which is what our human does, it's okay, because anger gets us going in the direction we had to go in the first place. We should have gone, but we didn't go. Anger propels us forward. So it's important in that part of the process too, that sometimes it gets us out of things. But until we resolve the whole timeline, we're going to still be repeating it in some way, even if the anger propelled us out, and it was supposed to. So you got to really kind of look at where you are with that. Is the anger just going to propel me out? Or can I resolve this whole thing without having to repeat it somewhere else with a different cast and crew of people, or the same damn people all over again? Can I just kind of get out of it? What can I do? What can I do to get out of this? And resolve it, because all these timelines, yes, they do converge again. The energies are going to be the same. That's why even when people will talk about a past life and they talk about, my Egyptian timelines. Well, technically they're happening right now. The only reason you're even tapping into that is because you have something similar energetically going on in this timeline right now. That's why every time you get past lives, they're always going to change. You go one time and they tell you about this happened in this time, and next time you go, well, now it's this other past life. Or you just remember them on your own because they're in your DNA and they're technically taking place at the same time. So there's an energy signature that's similar in all those timelines. That's what's making you curious about it. And same thing with the ones we created in this reality, in this human existence. We're curious about it because there's something similar going on in that timeline. Well, there's a thread there. You pull on the thread. The actual other timeline technically doesn't matter. What matters is what's the thread? What's going on? What's the program running? Why am I all of a sudden so curious about being, an Egyptian, working in an Egyptian pyramid or whatever I was doing back in Egypt? Because people get lost in the story. Our human gets lost in the story of the timeline, right? We want to know all about it. Oh my God, I was a princess in England in 1642 or whatever. None of that matters. The only reason you're tapping into it at all is because there's something similar happening right now. Same thing with the timelines we create in this one. The only reason you have a curiosity about it is because there's a similar thread going on. There's something going on that makes us want to tap into it. There's something going on that wants us to bring it in. So be open and be curious about it. I think when we start to, like I said, in the beginning, we sense them very differently than how we start to sense them now. And now I can't say so much I ever really go back and really think about the timelines, but I can see the convergent points in the timeline. When you converge with another timeline, because you end up in kind of the same place. You end up with the same people you were supposed to end up with before. You just went a different way to get there. Some contracts you can't get out of. Some you can mix and match. Some you can do this timeline or do these whole contracts. It doesn't matter. Others, no, I've got to meet these 2-3 people. These are the I can't get out of these 3. But these other 12 or whatever, I can move those around. It doesn't matter. I meet them at the store for 20 minutes or I meet them here. Because you can meet someone at the store for 20 minutes years later, but because your frequency is so high, have the same impact as if you had met them 15 years before and known them for 3 years. Because your frequency is what's dictating the activation of the other person, whether you even talk to them or not. It doesn't matter. Normally you will, but you don't have to. I think there were some times when I just sat at certain places and I didn't talk to anybody at all. And I'd had a couple people who were no-shows, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll get them next time. Be open and be curious. Don't become obsessed with a different timeline that you're not experiencing right now. Because if you are, well, let me rephrase that. If you are becoming obsessed with a different timeline, you need to look at the programming that's causing that. There's some correlation between the 2 timelines. So whether you're just working off the obsession energy, but don't leave the present moment to go dive into a timeline that you're not experiencing right now. Because what's important is right now. It's not any of these other things floating around in a sense. Bring it back to right now. Don't worry about the timeline in your childhood where this went this way and this went this way. Be concerned more about what's the program I'm running that's very much the same as the program there, or why I made that decision back then, or why I didn't. Look at why you didn't make that decision or did make that decision, and now you might have a similar decision coming up or a totally different decision. But the consciousness and the programming is what's important. If the program is still running that made you make that decision before, that might be why all of a sudden it's converging again. There's a different convergent point to that same decision because the program at which you made the first one in is now still running. And now are you going to make a different decision? Are you now going to go a different way, or are we going to, is it going to converge? Are you going to be able to break the program? They will converge in ways you don't expect them to. And you will bring a lot of them in ways you don't expect them to. And that's the other fun thing about parallel timelines and all of our timelines, not just the ones we create here, is that technically we can bring any of them in. Technically, because it's just us living them, we can bring any of them in. But some of them, it's be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you are bringing in, and in a sense of, do I want to go through that timeline, or is it just the glory of that timeline I want to go through? Can I do the timeline? Is it going to backtrack my process, my ascension process to go through this timeline? And those are things we really want to look at, because sometimes we feel a lot of regret over choices we did made or didn't make. And like I said, none of the choices really matter. You're going to end up where you're going to end up anyway. They're all going to converge at some point, one way or the other. The experiences might be different here and there, but the outcome is going to be the same, because that's the outcome of your life template. And once you're done with your human life template, then your soul template. It doesn't really matter. But we can have a lot of regret over these other choices. The road we didn't take. When we thought we could do this, we had this dream and we didn't do it. Why? Now I went down this whole road and now this was a disaster. Well, chances are that other one was a disaster too. All of our human choices ended up in disaster. That's just how they end up. I mean, they all end up not where we wanted them to be, and we all wanted something else and we got there and we didn't end up where we wanted to end up, and that's just how it works. So none of them were this brilliancy we thought they were going to be. They just weren't. So, all right, I'm going to check my chat, and I think I'm going to leave parallel realities. Oh, I do have a question. Are you inside or outside of the matrix? Interesting question. I am at this point outside of the matrix. In the sense I don't live in human consciousness realities, and I don't live in human beliefs anymore. So it's actually a great question, because a lot of us think we're out of it and we're not. And because if we're still impacted by anything outside of us, we're still in some way letting the human beliefs, which create the whole thing, but they're all inside of us. We're still looking at outside of us, and we're still looking at something outside and saying it's now this is affecting me. It's your fault. This is because this happened. We're still looking at the external, and we're still letting ourselves off the hook in a sense, because we program the whole thing. If we program the matrix and we programmed our experience, how is anyone else responsible for it other than us? It's always going to be us, because we programmed it. We agreed to do this thing. We agreed to do this reality, and we might have gotten totally screwed over in this reality. We still agreed to do it. It's not like we were a victim in that reality. Now, we are going to go through that reality to clear victim energy and play the victim, or maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to victimize someone else in a sense, and we're playing the other side of it. But when we talk about all these parallel timelines, remember, you've been everything in every timeline. You've been the criminal. You have been the one that, you've been everything. Anything you can imagine, you've been it. You've been the serial killer. You've been killed. You've been all of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what scenario you want to run. You have played every side of it. Every facet of every reality, you have played the part. That's why we start dropping judgment on what other people are playing right now. Because we've played those roles too. We have done that. I've done that. You've done that. We've all done it. And we also find a lot of times we don't want to admit it. Our human doesn't want to admit it when we're in a lot of these realities, but we can feel a sort of kinship to certain people, no matter what they've done. Because we know somewhere deep down we've done that too. So when you completely disconnect, and that means you're not letting any of the human beliefs, you don't believe them, you are setting your own path. And when you are out of the human realities, it's not like it's easy. A lot of times it's a lot harder to live outside of those realities, because there's a lot of conveniences in those realities. And when you step outside and you don't let those mentalities or beliefs, and you get your body clear of a lot of that programming that kept you there, where you believed all the things that you get fed every day and the choices you make to stay in these realities, we make a lot of choices to stay unconscious. And our human consciousness tries to keep us there. And everything we build within that consciousness tries to keep us there. That's what it does. That's why it does it. That's what it does. That's the reason behind all of it. We kind of imprison ourselves and then get pissed off we've imprisoned ourselves, and then we have to work to get out. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's not that hard to get out. It is difficult because we're working within the programming of our body that has to be reprogrammed. It's not as easy as in the movie The Matrix and they just suck Neo out and he's out. It's a much longer process because it's too jarring to realize everything you worked for, everything you believed, everything you've seen, all of a sudden, well, that's not really real anyway. That's not real. That doesn't even make any sense. Everything, the human reality just appeal foolish. And to someone in a human consciousness, I would appear very foolish because it's a completely different consciousness of how you're seeing and the realities you're experiencing and what you're seeing in those realities. So, all right, hopefully that answered the question. And I think we're going to end it there. So I will see everyone next time. Bye.